From Fantasy to Reality, Journey Through Modern Gambling and Recovery, featuring Saul Malek. In this episode, Saul Malek shares his compelling story of transitioning from a casual love of fantasy sports to a dangerous world of sports betting. Saul opens up about how he shares his personal story of the rapid decline he experienced during his college years that ultimately led to life-changing consequences in his path to recovery. He discusses his mission to educate youth, adolescents, and college audiences about the risks of modern gambling. Saul reflects on respecting autonomy, spreading his message across various platforms, and then challenges his speaking truth in spaces that may not want to hear it. Join us for an insightful conversation about the realities of gambling and the hope of recovery. Our guest on this episode is Saul Malek. He grew up in Houston, Texas to a loving family. He was blessed to attend the prestigious St. John's School from 6th grade through high school, learning many things and discovering a variety of interests. Hobbies like choir and French competitions kept him busy, but he found he was most passionate about fantasy sports. The St. John's Fantasy Baseball League was a way to enjoy baseball and connect with friends, remaining a staple of his life throughout his freshman year of college at Trinity University. Everything changed during sophomore year when an acquaintance introduced him to sports betting through his local bookmaker. Suddenly, the slow-paced, season-long fantasy league was too tame, and he needed more action. In just under 2 years, from September 2017 to July 2019, he lost sleep, money, time, relationships, and almost his life. He knew he needed help. Now, more than 5 years absent of gambling, he has made it his mission to educate others so that they can avoid the same mistakes he made. Saul has been invited to speak to schools, podcasts, news outlets, and other organizations as a trusted source on modern gambling. Visit the podcast notes to find more information on how to contact him through his website and email and his social media account links.
This is Talking Addiction and Recovery, the podcast talking, you guessed it, all about addiction and recovery. Join your host, licensed professional counselor Andrew J. Schreier, as he and his guests break down recovery topics with raw honesty, delving into niche conversations around the topics of substance abuse, mental health, and gambling. We intend to meet individuals where they are on their own personal journey of recovery, with dignity, respect, and compassion. We'll do more than talk addiction and recovery. We'll explore it. We're glad you've joined us. Here with today's episode, your host, Andrew Schreier.
Welcome to Talking Addiction and Recovery podcast, Saul Malek. It's great to see you. I'm glad you decided to join the podcast and talk.
Man, AJ, it's always nice to see you, whether it's in person or here between two computer screens. It is always a pleasure. Thank you for having me on today.
Yeah, for listeners, you and I met at a conference. We've seen each other at other conferences. I feel like that was a short time ago, and you have been all over doing a lot of speaking and talking engagements. So can you give, listeners a little bit of your background for those who do not know about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So my name's Saul Malek. I'm 26 years old. I live in Dallas, Texas. I have been in the gambling, addiction, recovery, education, awareness arena for the last few years. I'd say that my advocacy efforts really got going in 2022. So it's a personal connection for me. I developed an addiction to gambling in college. Back in 2017, I was introduced to online sports betting from a friend, and that quickly went down a very crazy path for me to where I was essentially left with the option of quitting altogether or, being met with a very unfortunate demise there. So anyway, I quit gambling in 2019. I've been clean since then. And since 2022, where I went back to my high school and gave an assembly talk. From there, I've really polished my story and developed my my personal testimony into being able to speak at schools all over, conferences all over, popular media outlets. And I think it's really timely to be able to share not just about addiction, but about recovery, in a time where I'm sure as you can relate in your work to how many young people especially are getting very caught up in gambling and compulsive gambling. So that's really the gist of it. Is my own personal experience led me to really diving deep into speaking and educating other people that are gamblers and not gamblers. And I think that's a big part of it too, which maybe we can get to, is speaking to people that may not already be addicted or caught up in it, but serving as kind of a warning sign.
Yeah, I want to start with, your audience. I mean, I think you'll talk to anyone who is going to listen and want to listen, but you have focused on, like you said, high school, college. I think in my experience, there's been a lot of, um, well, why do we need to talk about kids about gambling? Or why do we need to talk about youth? They're not 21, they're not of age, almost like, um, out of everything else that there is to talk, and there's a lot of things to talk about with youth, right? Substance use, mental health, and everything going on. But gambling often gets ignored, and you're really in your work trying to shine a light, call to action, and say, no, this is the age where we need to talk to people about gambling. So, can you share a little bit more about that? Because that's a challenge, man. That's hard to have people want that to be a topic to listen to, or to dedicate time or funding to host a speaker on gambling. But you've been doing it, you haven't given up on that challenge. So can you talk a little bit about that?
There are two walls that must be penetrated, I think, in order to effectively get the message out to schools. I think the first is getting through the administration, right? Because that's who brings a speaker in the first place. I think having the references and just getting in the door in the first place through a connection that I already had, I think was a very meaningful start. So that way someone could vouch not just for me, but for the topic and say, hey, heads of schools in this conference, like these high schools, this is something to take a look at. And, then once word kind of gets around, some momentum is built. So I think that that's an important thing, is making those personal connections so that it's not an entirely cold pitch, and then finding a way to relate gambling in young people to other things that it's connected to, like social media, and how does social media affect gambling, the perceptions of money, and needing gambling to fit in. It's like, okay, you can relate it to more things. You're more likely to be able to get in. You're not just a one-trick pony. But then the second wall to get through is the students themselves. When you're already there, like how can I connect with them? How do I speak to some students where I'm not lecturing at them, and I'm not just like, trying to put an end to their fun, or, tell them what to do. And I think it comes from a place of sharing, really. Like, if it's my story and this is what I experienced, and just serving as a caution, then I don't think someone else is likely to get offended by my story. This is just what happened to me. I'm not telling you what to do. And so it's just putting that information out there to say, well, maybe this is something to consider, but you make your own choices. And I think that, for instance, like an all boys high school, I said it at the last talk I did when I was up in Massachusetts, that I'm not delusional. I don't think you're going to leave this assembly and everyone's going to go delete the fantasy app off their phones and they're all going to be done watching sports. And that's not even really the goal. I think the goal is to make these students aware so that they don't engage in these products in a way that would be addictive or harmful. And so, I mean, ultimately, right? Like, I think that's at least my goal, is that people out there are not putting themselves in harm's way. And so having that information is important.
Yeah, there was a book written by a father's son about substance use, and it was geared towards like a younger audience. And the title of the book was Just Say No, but it was KNOW, versus the Just Say No NO, which was, if you give people, education, knowledge, awareness, like then there's an idea that like they can make a better informed decision, as if they didn't know these things, and they're still going to make decisions. Like I think you mentioned it, like our goal is like they're not going to make a decision that I like my decision. They're going to make their own decision. Um, and with your way that you're trying to relate to audiences and share with them and talk with them is, from what I've seen, it comes across as you sharing your story, giving insight, education, awareness, and some decision making tools, not just come to this conclusion, but here's all this stuff that when you are faced with these situations or you're faced with what might be going on, now you can decide and have more with that decision versus without it, it can become very impulsive. It can become very reactive. And we know those are things that, I did this and I didn't think about it, or I did this without thinking about something. So it's been impressive when I've seen you speak on in that way.
Thank you. Thank you. I think what you were mentioning about, almost changing or helping to influence the line of thinking rather than the decision itself, that makes me think of something I'd seen on my LinkedIn feed. There is a very experienced speaker on drug abuse named Rocky Heron, and I mean he puts his stuff out in public. So anyway, he made a post once about the pushback he sometimes gets of, well, you're coming in to just do this one lecture, or you're doing one talk to the students. How's that going to matter when they go home after the school day ends? And it's like they just don't retain any of it. And his point was, well, he's trying to change the way they think about it. So that way there is some sort of long-term benefit to it if the students in the audience change their perspective on drug use or whatever, then they really can take it further. And then he even says also, well, shoot, if I'm not doing this, like at least what I'm doing is better than what the status quo is, which is to do nothing at all. So, it's something. So,
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, you do have an audience that, I mean, it's the message might not be the same for every single person that you're speaking to. There might be some that like they don't even gamble. They have no intention right now of gambling. They might even hear you and feel resonated as to why they don't. But you might have someone who, when you tell your story and share it, there might be someone who's like, yeah, it sounds like me, and that can connect. So it's how has it been, with the one thing I think that makes you different is you also talk about, like modern gambling. And I
mhm.
think we say this a lot about marijuana and a substance. Like we say a lot of this isn't your grandmother's marijuana anymore. This isn't the Woodstock weed, because of like how that has changed. And I think for those of us who work in the gambling area, we know there's been so many changes, but I don't think as many people are aware of those changes. Like when they hear gambling, they still think it's someone going to a casino. Um, and it's like that's not necessarily where the kids are going or where like youth are going, but that doesn't mean they're not gambling. So can you talk a little, because I remember when I was younger in high school, college, like there was nothing about a speaker coming in talking about gambling. Um, but now with the availability of gambling, what's gone on now with different types and ways and expansion, like this is a different time than what it used to look like 5, 10, 20 years ago. And you're speaking on someone who that is the gambling you were involved in.
That's an interesting point. And I think that misconception that you alluded to of, well, it's just someone going to a casino and high schoolers aren't. That's not something that's happening. I got that pushback, or at least that feedback from a high school baseball coach on my LinkedIn recently, who just said, well, gambling, that's something our coach, like our players and coaches are doing. Like, shocked by that. So I think that, yeah, it is interesting to think that not all gambling is created equal, I would say. Like even betting on sports, it's different, right? If you're betting as a sports bettor, if you're betting on one football game and you're checking the score once in 3 hours versus betting on every quarter or even every play, whatever, then you're going so much quicker. There's so much randomness involved in, more bets you're placing. So I think that's a really big part of that. I guess getting even more niche into speaking about gambling in schools is just making faculty, parents, everyone aware of the, I guess, development of the products, the gambling products, and saying that, what kids are getting involved in. It's like, yeah, getting involved in a different strand of marijuana or like, synthetic marijuana or something like that's going to have significantly different effects. So I stay as updated as I can, and it's an interesting place to be as someone who does not gamble anymore
Yeah, how do you
to
balance
have
that
to,
with to staying up to date on something
yeah.
versus, because you're not into it. You have your own recovery that you're working with. So, you can't ignore because things are gonna be different in 5 years from now, I imagine, with gambling. So how do you balance that and pay attention to what are trends or what's new, what's going on? Because then you share that with people that you're speaking with.
I follow a lot of sources. I follow all the state gambling councils. I follow National Council on Problem Gambling. They're always publishing different articles. I'll look up gambling or gambling scandal or, college gambling, student gambling, go into news and read different articles. On Instagram, I think just because I post content and look at content about gambling and gambling addiction, I will get videos in my feed of like different gambling related memes, and so that takes me into things like cryptocurrency and the stock market and stuff. So I'm able to see different things that I wouldn't otherwise be seeing. But I don't go venture into gambling platforms online to where I'd be able to place a bet or anything. I'm really just kind of reading things from the outside, which I think is essential because there is no doubt that the individual personal story holds weight. Otherwise, I don't think I'd have any opportunity if it didn't. But I think enhancing that with some context and some other stories, being able to tell stories of things that are going on in the world, I think really makes it well-rounded and not like, okay, this is getting stale. It's just the same thing over and over. Like, add some depth to it. So.
Can you talk a little bit on, and this just kind of came to me on like some of the changes that have happened. And I remember when I was working with gambling for years now, I have been as a counselor, and I used to work with people on, not going back to the casino or coping skills to not go to the ATM. But that's so different now. Like the ATM, the casino can be your phone. It can be a computer. Um, and sort of like how has that changed with for people to work in their recovery and to really kind of man like gambling can be accessible pretty quickly whenever. Um, as to before, there was a little bit more of, you know, distance to go somewhere. You had to go or and some people still do those things. Don't get me wrong, but in your talks when you share about your recovery and you talk with people um who are experiencing problems, do you notice some of those things that are different now with how to, protect your recovery and manage that with all these changes that have happened?
What I think is interesting, it's worked for me. I mean, I personally am a big proponent of GA, Gamblers Anonymous, and I know that part of the instruction in that program is don't test or tempt yourself. And for me, that means going, not going on to look at the line of different games, things like that. I think there's only so much that can be done now to not see it, but I think there's a difference between just seeing it, like, okay, it's out there, and attaching to it, engaging with it. And I'd say that having a recovery, like not just abstaining, but working on character and just being involved in my own life has made it so that I'm not so disturbed by seeing gambling out there. So it's like, okay, I can't control that it exists everywhere. I'm not trying to fight that it's on billboards or on TV. I'm just not going out of my way to see it. And I recognize, okay, it's out there. It's like, I don't drink a ton of alcohol, so if I go see that there's hard liquor being sold, I don't know, at a restaurant or whatever, it doesn't trigger me, doesn't get into my head. So I think it's getting to a point where yes, it's out there. Yes, it's gambling, I'm not supposed to be doing it, but it's not something that is haunting me on a regular basis.
Yeah, I mean, those are all great examples where like now, how many commercials are there, billboards, ads, even if you're checking scores for a sporting event, even if you're not looking for anything betting related, like there are still places that post, things about betting, even if that's not. Um, so I just think that's where the exposure to it is something people are gonna have. It's not where I'm not gonna see it or not.
Hmm.
It's just so much more, you know, present in our world today than how it was, years ago.
I think to that point, I know, I mean, I hear at a lot of meetings that I've gone to, newer people in Gamblers Anonymous will often say, well, I didn't even think about gambling today. Like that's the goal that they set for themselves. I didn't even think about it. But to me, that's not my objective is I didn't think about it at all. I mean, I don't want to be obsessing over gambling or not gambling, but the thought or noticing it, that's not the problem. The problem is acting on it or having it interfere with my life. So I think, well, to try to eliminate gambling from the world, it's a fool's errand. I mean, gambling has been around, I would think, since the very beginning of time, and clearly not going away anytime soon. So rather than trying to hide from it, it's like, okay, let me learn how to just coexist with that being in the world. There's a guy that I really like who's in GA, so I won't say his name, but he's a guy in GA who says they could build casinos up and down my street everywhere, and it wouldn't bother me because, I'm in my recovery and, I don't have to let it affect me. So.
Do you get any pushback when you're doing, because you are in a way sharing your story, your recovery, but you are also educating, you are a public speaker, you are giving people, knowledge. Do you ever get any pushback on, you know, on that stance of like, there's going to be gambling around, people are going to gamble. My goal is not to like eradicate it or like that's a, as you said, like a fool's errand. Do you ever get any like pushback or resistance that's like allowing, the enabling word we hear a lot in our profession? Any sort of reaction like that from people?
I've seen some feedbacks on some YouTube videos and things where I've been on, people will say, well, the guy just didn't have self-control. So, talking about this as an addiction, it's pretty much a cop out or let people make their own decisions. And I've been real careful to um, share in a way where I'm hoping that it is allowing people to feel like they're making their own decisions. But I mean, maybe it's perceived just the fact that it's a person talking to a group and speaking about gambling by highlighting its risks, it may seem like, well, he's the anti-gambling speaker and he's here to push this agenda. And, I'd say I have gotten some of that pushback. I've had friends who say, well, how are your like anti-gambling talks going? And I think, well, I'd wish you'd be able to sit in and see what's going on in these schools so that you can see that I'm not there to be anti-gambling. I'm there to try to encourage students to make healthy choices, be aware of what they're doing to really be conscious of their decision making. From my perspective, someone who's still fairly young and can relate to what it's like to be impulsive, wanting to fit in, wanting to feel a certain way in school. I think it comes across as very genuine and not like a teacher having to push something on students. So with there being any pushback, I think if anything, it's an opportunity to say, well, maybe focus on a certain part of the story differently, or maybe there's something to change. And then there's also some where it's like, well, that person may have just been trolling online, and yeah, that's fine. It's the internet. I mean, people say some heinous things online. Doesn't matter. So,
Yeah, I think I get that too when people think, and I've had friends, family, like because of like when they know what I do, if I tell people I'm a substance use counselor, they think I'm against like
mhm.
every if I tell people I'm a gambling counselor, they think I'm against everything. Like no matter what I do, it's they think that I'm against that when really for me it's as a counselor, it's always my goal is to provide a safe space for anyone, you know, dealing with any of those issues that they can share their experience and be in a space where to be themselves is not judging and no harm. So it's interesting too. Like I know a topic like when you're a speaker on it, that I think there may be some preconceived notion or idea that like he's a in recovery, that must mean he's against gambling and all this type of stuff. So that's tough because I mean that does go into your story and what you've dealt with, but also is your story is not everyone's story. Your story isn't trying to be everyone else's that you're speaking to. Um, you're not trying to have everyone have the same story as you.
That's a really great point. I think that's crucial as a presenter to be aware of, right? Is that if I say, well, I did this fantasy baseball thing and I was obsessed with the Astros, that is my story, and I can share that and connect it to some more broad topics, but being mindful of the fact you're right that not everyone will have that experience. And so being aware my personal experience is not the way the world is shaped for other people necessarily. It's more of some of these more broad concepts that I think it's like, okay, as a younger person, maybe you can relate, but I try to make it so that it's catered to whatever school or audience I'm in front of, so that it does take into account what what their culture is, or what their beliefs would be. Because yeah, that would be an easy thing to fall into, is just assuming that everyone knows what I'm talking about when it's like we've never experienced that. So
Yeah. And you shared your story on a lot of different platforms. I mean, I feel like I look at what you're doing on LinkedIn and it's you're at a conference, a professional one that's on gambling. You're at a conference for mental health for adolescents. You're talking to, you know, a group of school kids, or you're at a college. You've been on TV shows. You know, you're talking to a lot of different people. How's that been for you? I mean, you've been doing a lot of that over this last year, and the audience has been far and wide. You've been across the map here, different venues of places. How have you been able to do that? Because, like we said before, it's not easy having gambling selected for that stuff. I tell everyone gambling proposals are my most rejected
hmm.
proposals. So if I do ones on substance use, if I do ones on mental health, um, most conferences I go to, I also look, are there any on gambling? And there's so many that don't, but you've been able to make that happen. Like, can you talk a little bit about just how you've been able to do that and what's been like going to different places to speak to audiences ranging from kids to adults and all that, because it's been quite an incredible year for you on this speaking engagements.
Well, yeah, thank you for saying that. I think that a big part of it has been the conferences where I've looked at are conferences that are attempting to uncover some trend or emerging issues. So like if I spoke at the like the Texas School Counselors Conference, it's like, okay, they're always looking at what's the new thing, what's coming up, and putting out gambling there and explaining in my proposal that this is on the rise since 2018, the Supreme Court, and the states being able to legalize sports betting and showing some introductory numbers to it and just saying how this affects people. I think it's like, okay, that catches some attention. And I mean, I don't get accepted into everything that I do either. There was a fraternity council conference or something that I put a proposal. I thought the title I thought was so clever. I guess I'll share it here. I mean, I hope no one takes it, but I said, what do we do about Jimmy the Greek? Like Jimmy the Greek, like the Greek life fraternity member, Jimmy the Greek, like the gambler. And I thought,
Yeah.
well, it's a very clever title and it's a relevant topic. And then it was like, no, it hadn't been accepted. So yeah, it's not an all the time guaranteed thing, but I think being able to also build off prior engagements and say, well, I was at this similar conference here and this was the feedback I got. And so it's almost just like constantly leveraging and then you get more leverage and then you can just it's just like kind of stacking it up over time. I think the difficult thing about all of it has been because my recollection of certain specific events within my gambling story, it gets fuzzy. It really does. Like, okay, well then when was this bookie? Like, okay, this was in 2018, and then I came back to school, and then I saw my parents, and then I was already this much in the hole. And in my mind, when I try to remember things, it does sometimes change. And I'm like, gosh, I really want to be careful when I share to make sure that my story is consistent because I sometimes will remember things off how I previously just shared it. And I feel like I've done a good job at highlighting things that are relevant to where I don't need to know every specific name of every bookie at every time. Like some of those details are not entirely relevant, but at the same time, it's been like, yeah, okay, just mapping out. That's what I've been doing, just mapping out how I want to tell the story and which parts, how can I structure it so that it is consistent? It highlights the relevant points, tells some stories because I mean, I know for a fact that all of this happened. Like, I mean, ask anyone out there. You have the statements, I have photos that I use in my talks from interactions with bookies and things. It's like, yeah, it did happen, but keeping that credibility and saying like, let me make sure my story is straight. It's like that's taken a lot of effort to not deviate from that to where you have two interviews and it's like, well, his story's not adding up. So it's something I've taken some attention to.
Are there any parts of I mean, when you first start telling your story and presenting like it, one of the things I love about presenting is like no presentation is really ever the same. It changes because when I did it with this audience, I learned something more, or their reaction to it gave me some insight. So, it's I always look at it as that they're never the same. And how I used to present on a topic, years ago, and now how it is it's different. And that's kind of growth. That's adapting to some of the feedback you get and things we learn more about when you've start sharing your story to, as you continue to share it, there's going to be different ways or different things that are highlighted. Do you find that there are certain parts of your story that audiences uh, get captivated to more, or that they ask questions about? Like when I hear you talk about bookie, I think people are like, bookies, is that like still a thing? I remember you tell the story a couple of times of how far you drove once
Oh, yeah.
so like hearing you, I can like when I've heard you share your stories in times and I've listened to some of your engagements, like it's never the exact same way. There's always some change to it. But have you noticed that there are certain parts of your story that either stick with people or that they tend to ask questions about? Or do you notice that people seem to, you know, connect more with when you are sharing it because the details aren't always going to be the same? The order sometimes will be different. And that's just part of when you share your story. It's not just a book that you read from start to finish every time. So I'm curious if there's ones that audience members have either, come up to you and ask you questions or talk to you about, like, parts of your story that really has resonated with people.
I'd say one that has especially gotten some attention recently is how I guess, juxtapose the gambling addiction with substance use or alcohol use. I tell the story of my first friend I ever met at college and how he was always into partying. He'd lived abroad for most of his life, so he was always going out in clubs when he was 14 years old, whatever, and how he had died off campus in the apartment where he was living from substance use. And that I tell the story of how after his passing, his father released a statement and a video for the school about risky behavior, and he talked in the video about substance use and how if you go to a party and take something that maybe you shouldn't have taken, and how that made the rounds around the school and that was being implemented everywhere. But I watched that I watched that video and thought, well, I'm really relieved that I wasn't like him while continuing to gamble. And so I know recently, like well, I flesh out the story and say, well, then I, didn't know that gambling could be of the serious nature that the drug use, the alcohol use was. And I had a teacher recently when I was in Massachusetts who said, well, that was really powerful that you shared that. And then I had a different school here in Texas where the um one of the teachers sent me an email after and said, well, I've never gambled, but that story you told about the friend, like I had the same similar thing happen to me and it really connected. So it's interesting to be able to share of other things that were going on at the time, how that related to my own experience. And then that actually will connect with the audience of, maybe I had been gambling and I didn't think that was even an issue. So,
Yeah, I think it makes it more of a, you highlight a connection that, gambling is a big part of the story, and it can be a big part of, but there's always so many other things going on. I mean, we have so many other things that are also connecting us, that gambling, even though it can be very isolating, or someone might think that that's not something I'm dealing with, but you got someone who might be gambling and drinking, and someone might be able to relate to the drinking, and maybe through that they can relate to times where maybe they have gambled more than they thought of when they were drinking. Like, there's a lot of those connections, and that's where sometimes, like, when you share your story, you know people are going to connect to different things, and it's not always going to be the same for everyone, but there's going to be some things that people listen to. And I think too, with what you shared, I said this before too, is like gambling doesn't get the attention because we don't see the headlines of all the people impacted by it or all the people that have died, because it is, as tough as this may be here to hear, like, gambling won't be a reason on a death certificate.
right,
It won't
right.
be this person died by gambling. But I tell people this all the time, and I never miss a chance to say it, is gambling hotlines are suicide prevention hotlines. Like, it doesn't get the attention it deserves, that for a lot of people who are struggling with gambling to that point and they call a hotline, like, the people on that other end are helping to prevent some significant consequences like suicide. And um, that's how it can get with gambling. And I think people still struggle with that concept because it's not a substance that's being put into them, or they're not ingesting something that I remember, and Doug,
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah,
you know,
definitely.
when what got me really into wanting to get involved in gambling was I heard him at a conference. Um, he was speaking and he said, gambling is like 20 years behind where we are with substance use. And I was like, to imagine being 20 years back for where we've been with substance use, gambling, as much progression as we've seen, as much of technology advancement, as much as we've seen with, you know, expansion with things, legislative changes, there's still a lot of it that's still trying to catch up. And I imagine your work is trying to help us get caught up with someone who is living in, that modern time of what's going on. So I guess my question with that is, with what you've been doing, the talks you've been having, the conversations, kind of trying to bring people more into today's world of gambling and what's going on, where do you see some of your work taking you as this will continue? Like, this isn't going anywhere. And we need someone like you to keep doing this work.
It's an interesting point, and it's something I have thought about. I think part of my goal is to be able to work with, there's different coalitions, different groups that receive grant funding. So to be able to say, hey, we're going to do a grant to where I'm going to hit up all these different schools or youth groups, and I'm just in one area going and speaking to parents, speaking to students, speaking to teachers, and really being able to make that process more efficient, I think is great. And here in Texas, the Texas Coalition is really trying to get off the ground here. So I think there's a lot of work to be done here in just the state of Texas. But I think finding a way to, I suppose, get in it, just more conferences, more things of that variety, because I think part of the problem is so many are focused on education within the gambling community, I guess if that's the right word. Like we're talking to people that already know what's going on. Why not go out there and talk to groups that have nothing to do with gambling, or they think they don't, but it's because they're not seeing it as a priority issue. So I think really broadening that scope is important. That's always been my mindset there.
That's a challenge, right? Because sometimes we can go to a conference where 9 out of 10 people will agree with us, or like they'll know it. Like they might not know everything, but they will have a pretty good understanding of, gambling, the risks and different things about it. But I think you're right where we can't get too comfortable just talking in the areas that we have familiar voices and ears who are going to agree to us. We need to go to an audience where there might be more people disagree with us, and how do we break down that barrier? Because I think that happens a lot with gambling because of how smaller of an issue it seems to people, and how we work in smaller spaces compared to mental health and substance use. That sometimes we can get caught into talking a lot and sharing a lot with others who agree with us or who are on the same page, and we need to actually put ourselves out there to places and people and spaces that they think we don't need to be there, or they think it's not a topic, and you're one who's been doing that. So how, I think a good way to close out with this is how do you keep that going? How do you find it in you to continue to knock on those doors for people who don't want to answer to you, or submit a proposal to a place that likely thinks there's 100 others that are more um, related to them? What what keeps you going with that? What helps you to continue, even though chances might be slimmer, versus sometimes picking a sure thing, or this would be great for this audience because this is what they do. How do you do that?
Say that I'm just naturally used to being determined. I mean, with my gambling, I was messaging hundreds of bookies, or not bookies, like random people on Facebook day in and day out to try to find new bookies. And I suppose it's just a mindset of, where someone could say is no or not respond. It's not really such a big deal to me. And I think I'm fortunate to be in a spot where, while it's nice to be compensated for doing most of these presentations and conferences and things, to have another job, like I'm still limo driving and everything, and I have that to fall back on. So it's not like I really have to be so pressed to, um, you know, make it work financially. It's like more of a, I guess, a passion project, I'd say, where like, yeah, I really want to make this happen. So it's not like doesn't bother me. I'm comfortable with whatever may happen, and I think that being driven by just the intrinsic motivation of it is enough to keep me going. Because I mean, I see it at these schools and things, especially with the young men who are out there gambling, and I'm like, man, that was me. So say being intrinsically motivated rather than having to push it on people like it's a multi-level marketing scheme or something where like you're desperate, it makes it more enjoyable to keep going with it.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm fortunate where I get to interact with you. I get to see the work you're doing. Sometimes I'm a attendee in the audience listening to
Yeah,
you.
yeah,
So
sure.
I feel like I'm pretty fortunate and thankful to get to have that experience. And I know not everyone listening to us gets to have that same, you know, relationship and access. So I really do appreciate, you coming on and talking about these things. I know we're going to talk more. We're going to see each other more. But it's
Hope we're
been,
both, yeah, at the Wisconsin. I'm hoping to go to that conference this year, so I guess we'll see on that. But yeah, definitely.
yeah. And just to see what you've done and, you know, since I met you to now in a short period of time has been pretty amazing in what you bring to your audiences and what you talk about. I couldn't be more of a, supporter in what you do. So that's why I'm very fortunate that you came on here and shared it with the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for the kind words, AJ. It's always nice, like I said, always nice seeing you, and I'm glad that we had time here after Thanksgiving to get together.
Yeah. So listeners will get, a chance to visit your website, find you on social media, and see more of things you've done, hear more of your engagements. I know you're going to be updating it too to include
Sure.
some of your most recent stuff. But and one thing I know too is like you engage with people who interact with you in your platforms. It's like LinkedIn and all that. Like that's a place where people can connect with you or your website and visit. So from what I know about you, you've been pretty open to connecting with people to learn more and share more about what you do.
Totally. Yeah, I love it. I love replying on LinkedIn and email and everything. So absolutely.
I think listeners got a lot from what you shared. We'll continue to learn from you. I think people should be paying attention because there's just going to be more and more coming from you in the future. So I think they learned a lot and can't thank you enough for being on the podcast.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
You've been listening to Talking Addiction and Recovery with Andrew J. Schreier. We're so glad you've joined us and invite you to connect further with the show and these topics at www.andrewjschreier.com. That's Andrew J. SCHREIER.com. You can also email us directly at talkingaddictionandrecovery@gmail.com and connect on social media, Instagram at Talking Addiction and Recovery, Facebook Talking Addiction and Recovery Podcast, and Twitter at TalkAR_podcast. To stay connected and never miss an episode, be sure to like, rate, and subscribe. Until next time, friends, let's keep talking addiction and recovery.